I met Mike about 2 years ago after I had done a forest management plan for some land in Cornwall that has a lot of buckthorn on it. And I was given a list of people that would deal with that. And Mike was the only person who did not use herbicides or pesticides. And I knew that I did not want to poison the soil or water. And I wanted to talk to this guy his business name is Got Weeds, which I loved. And so I called him and he came and looked and we talked and he showed me the processes that he goes through to manage these invasives and that are impacting our landscape. And it's really in keeping with our goals, our mission for the pollinator pathway, and remove invasives and don't use pesticides. So please help me welcome Mike. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction and the land acknowledgement. It's an honor to be here with you. And this evening, I want to say thank you to all of you for making the time. I would call you, because I went and looked at the Pathway website, and I certainly read up on the history of how it was founded, and Donna must be quite a whirlwind of energy in the New York, Connecticut area. So brilliant. A shout out to her and all of you, though, because yes, I do the work. Kind words. I get to admit, I'm going to admit Denise Green from the waiting room. Or did you already do that, Bethany? Okay.
I'm working on that, so you don't have to worry about it.
Okay, great. Thank you. I consider you all the difference makers. Bethany gave me a very warm welcome, and yes, it's true. It's absolutely true. I do not use chemical treatment programs in my approach to invasive species. Sometimes I've been listed on the website or as a contractor with the state. Other times I've not even been on the list because, well, maybe I'll just let somebody else explain why I'm not on the list. But I'm on there now, apparently. So when we, as landowners, choose to manage our land or to consume products or to basically all of our choices day by day, that's the power of the consumer, and it's a reflection of our values. And that's why I say that groups like you all are the difference makers. I just do the work. That's a very important distinction, and there are many of you, so please know that. So yeah, welcome and thanks again. Thanks for your good work and thanks for attending tonight. What I hope to do this evening is to craft a little ray of hope, because I know that the subject, even looking at the admittedly abandoned building there in the foreground, that's in Bellows Falls, that's in central Vermont. You see a single Oriental bittersweet plant like this, completely inside, outside, above and below the structure, and it's pretty intimidating. So it's not uncommon to come down with a serious case of the blues or the knotweed nightmares, or to have parsnip issues. So this is there are many of us in that regard as well. So I'm really hoping I can share some good information with you, answer your questions, give you some start points, and I will learn something this evening as well. So that's my intention, to refresh your mindset as we go into, this is my 13th growing season with Got Weeds. What fun. I started weeks ago, but today was wild chervil in Pomfret. So here's my official company spokesperson, just for the added charm factor. This is my company information. The only thing not on there is that, yes, this is year 13 with Got Weeds. I've been managing terrestrial invasive species for 20 plus years now. I learn something all the time, but I love sharing what I've learned as well. The geography is on there. I basically work from Cape Cod to the other side of the lake, to the New York side of the lake. You're welcome to take note of my email address and certainly send follow-up questions or observations. It is the busy season, but I'll get back to you. If you do have a question, it's always good to, beyond this evening, it's always great to take a photo and submit that my way, like with your question, because it's helpful to me to kind of have a little bit of a, not just the plant, but maybe the background, or just photos are helpful. So don't hold back on sending, 1 or 2 of those would be great. So there I am, weed control alternatives for those managing in the organic spirit. Organic, regenerative, we can talk through the difference there later if we wish to. So where do we begin when we are faced with this scenario on a regular basis? This is a pasture, an open meadow. There's a stone wall in there. This is prized property that somebody's hasn't managed in a while. And believe it or not, there is a stone wall in there, and there are even native species to be found. But that's a heck of a lot of Asiatic Oriental bittersweet. There's some native grapevines, and there's I don't recall poison ivy, but even the yellow buttercups in the foreground I believe those were a creeping buttercup, just to add to the non-native palette in the photo. You've got multiflora rose in there, honeysuckle. It's exactly what I'm trying to say here. Where do you begin? How, with what tools, which direction, which season, you might say. But I will say that before you dive in, you just take a deep breath and consider it from a safety standpoint, because managing habitat, improving biodiversity, helping pollinators, that's all brilliant work. But it's really inexcusable for us to get hurt ourselves, or to allow other people to get hurt in the process. So safety all the time. There's really no justification for cutting corners there, because when you look at this, you think you're seeing, you have an idea what you might want to do, you think you know what you're seeing, but if you were just to dive in, this is what's behind the green screen. And again, if you're careless or not attentive to the details, that's all going to come down. It's going to make for a pretty rough day when that all collapses. So know that you have to do some exploration, and I'd like to talk safety, certainly in the question and answer session. But I will say here, for your notes, there are 3 safety issues I always point out to people. That there's no shortage of safety issues. I've already had 2 ticks on me, so start with that. But I like to tell people, on the landscape, you basically need to be aware of 3 overarching safety issues, basically, when you're working when you work in the outdoors. And those are, as I'm doing in the photo, keep an eye above, keep an eye on what's above you. If you drop down and focus on the ground, you're gonna pull garlic mustard all the way to across the field, and you're gonna find yourself underneath an overhead hazard. So check up, check down, check all around. That's rule number 1. Safety issue number 2 is old steel on the landscape. So if there is a stone wall, or maybe a boundary between 2 places, you have to really think about that and say, I wonder if there's barbed wire here, because the last thing you want to do is trip when you're carrying the heavy tools, and maybe you're carrying wild parsnip. And Old steel includes wire, fence posts, broken glass. I'll throw that in the category because there's plenty of old dumps out there where we discarded our unwanted or broken material. Safety challenge number 3 is just poison ivy. It's the plants. It's a wild poison ivy is a native species. I've had people tell me it takes 2 months to recover from a poison ivy exposure for them. The plants are getting more aggressive and more potent with climate change. And like in my case, I've had to stop. I haven't had a poison ivy issue in quite some time, but if it gets really bad, I mean, you basically have to stop work for 2 days, a week, and just let everything heal up. And it's an immune system response. So you have to allow the time. So between poison ivy and old steel on the landscape and overhead hazards, we dress for that. We can talk about behavior. We can talk about tools. We can talk about more safety themes, but I wanted to get those out there because those are very common. Let's come back to that. Especially if you have group outings. Again, I want you all to be able to share safety points with people who are trying to help you achieve the regional goals and the habitat goals that you've set. So really, once I look at a site like that previous slide, I really step back and start thinking, what am I going to do here that right there at the top sets the stage for my return? I'm not here to do a one-time treatment, or I'm not going to tell anyone, knowing that these species have a seed life of 4, 5, perhaps 10 years or longer. There's just no such thing as a one-year project. So in the case of buckthorn, wild parsnip, barberry, a 5-year seed life means a 6-year control project minimum. And I say 6 years, I really mean 6 growing seasons. So I have to set the stage for my return to come back through a site and see the progress and make the progress. And if it's not me doing that, then I'm happy to train local people or landowners as well, so they can be the ones who return. Because it doesn't have to be me, but it's always good to together to kind of read the landscape and see what's going on and share observations. I like that. I like that way of thinking. We're eternalizing our commitment when we train other people and ideas, and share ideas. Excuse me. So it's all about transition, and the transition is what takes the several years. What you're trying to do is suppress a certain palette of species, the non-native ones, suppress them, put them under pressure while you foster the growth and the emergence and the resilience of the native species. You can introduce natives. I can guarantee there's already quite an assortment already in place. So the transition is the big deal. I mentioned learning individually, and when you work together as a team, you certainly learn the skills of close teamwork, and that is also important. I always want to mention the idea of rehabilitation, because our landscapes in most of the country, but certainly in Vermont, are really depleted and sometimes dysfunctional. I mean, we can talk about this for a long time. Low on calcium, low on organic matter, compacted. Those are 3, big negatives. We had a century of acid rain. That was not helpful. So restoration has its place, but I believe the word rehabilitation pushes us to acknowledge that the land is in fact depleted, and our job is to nurse it back to health. We're not going to restore to some previous condition. That condition is long gone. But we can work with what we have, and we can bring the landscape and the system to a healthier place. I mentioned the story at the bottom of the slide because I was listening to a presentation from some organic farmers, and I was just impressed that they mentioned when people support them, when people buy their products, they are really interested in supporting the story of the farm. So that's true. I mean, that should carry over to other features of the landscape, and certainly your property and town and state and national ownerships. It's all, there's a story there, and telling the story is really powerful. Whether it's farming or managing landscapes, transitioning landscapes, and get the people involved when telling the story. There is a story. You see the oak tree to the right, that little placard, that little wooden block in the crack of the tree. That's an oak tree in South Burlington at Wheeler Nature Park. That tree draws people. It's a big tree. It's a 3-person ring around the tree. People build fairy houses and wood elf little structures and all kinds of things there. And that little square in the tree says, "We can heal together," which I didn't put that there. I can just see that, wow, people are drawn here, and there's a story here. So I wanted to mention that. So I think I've covered this slide. I'm just stopping for a second to summarize. Safety all the time, and I won't say that it comes first. It should always be foremost in our minds. From before setting foot in the outdoors and to when we return safely and put away our tools and take care of ourselves and check for ticks and all those important things. I mentioned learning efficiencies. Efficiency is really in reference to us. Effectiveness is the word I would use to my methods in accomplishing what I'm trying to do on the land. So people hire me, so I want to be efficient, because basically they've got to see that there's a cost effectiveness. But the methods have been questioned over time, and people have stated, Mike, I don't know, manual control, mechanical control, it's not nearly as cost effective. There's no way we can get it done. This project's too big. And I totally disagree with that, because after you get to know a place and you've been out there several times and you've set the stage for your return, you gain, your efficiency doubles. I count, okay, when I'm working on a landscape, I count number of parsnip pulled, number of buckthorn cut, you name it, number of hours worked. I record the date. For some reason, I just became a fanatic about keeping records about what I do. I need to find efficiency for myself as well. So there are some immeasurables, or there are some kind of non-traditional things we should be looking at when I talk about cost effectiveness. And that includes things like not having to close a site. I don't use chemicals because I want people out with me training alongside, and I don't want them to have to wear a mask or be all geared up, or that they couldn't even come out at all, or we'd have to close the park for a day. There's just no reason to do that. I use brush cuttings, whether it's apple trees or buckthorn crowns. I build habitat for ground nesting birds, and I use the cuttings to build really compacted piles for basically we're creating soil. So I don't burn anything. There's no reason to. That carbon belongs in the ground, not in the atmosphere. To me, that's a strong value that I can bring to the landowner, homeowner, and that really never gets counted in grant world and in some of the agencies as they measure things. Do know that the work is incremental. I put that out there, so it's kind of an expectations thing. Again, but it feeds into the setting the stage for our return. So if I'm careful with my brush, and if I don't leave just this mess on the landscape, chaos is okay, don't get me wrong, but to come back to an area and just have to navigate a pickup sticks setting, or just some jungle gym because I didn't think about coming back, that's important to that's how I'm setting the stage. We'll get into that. You may wonder what the service ethic is, my last point there. I really strongly I do not subscribe to the idea of war on weeds. I presented this in Michigan. I actually presented this show that you're seeing tonight to the Stewardship Network. I'm a fan, so stewardshipnetwork.org. I did an entire presentation for them a few years ago on what is stewardship and the idea of it's not a war. There's no, you see these publications all the time, the battle against invasives or the war on weeds, the war on bugs. And I've had people stop and ask me at Red Rocks Park, hey, what are you doing in there? You're battling the buckthorn. And I'm like, well, no, I'm actually just kind of, working with the system and moving things in a good direction here. I said, good direction. Is that right? Well, let's not even get into good and bad, because I don't want to label things good and bad in nature. So I leave you with a couple quotations. There is no right or wrong in nature, only consequence. That's not my quote, but I came across that several years ago and I subscribe to that. I love it. The other one is, you can be a weed warrior. You can come out and it's an adrenaline rush, and if that's the way you need to think, that's fine. But the military, I am ex-military. It was certainly a gift to learn the skill of reading the land and how things move across the land. Whether it's people or vehicles or deer or woodchucks or wind or water. But the idea in the military is that it's an honor to serve, and the notion is that it's a service commitment, because in serving each other we become free. So here we are in Wheeler Nature Park in South Burlington, and when the city hired me 5-6 years ago, they wanted to know how I would manage 100 acres, which includes all kinds of different little specific areas, like a wetland or a grassland or a young forest or a mature forest. So there were five systems here, and this is a photo of the wetland. That's the wooden walkway there. That's for visitors when the water level is up pretty high. So I asked the city, I said, sure, I can make a plan, but you have to tell me what your vision is. So when I'm making a plan, it's really three things. It's what is the vision, and that's the landowner's prerogative, not so much mine. They have to tell me, we wish to keep it open, we wish to let the forest, or we wish to let the land kind of reforest, or we want to bring in grazing animals, we want to build trails, whatever it is, the vision comes from the landowner. And it's a long-term, what do you want to see? Then I go out and I scout around, have a good look about, and come back and say, well, this is what I found. These are the species on site, and these are the ones I would prioritize based on experience. And this is what your site allows. So if it's a steep site, I would say to people, soil disturbance really not the best fit for this location. So we know how to manage certain species of plants. We know what really knocks them down or kills them off, but your site restricts us in the following ways. So that's it, really. I get the vision, I combine that with the palette of species. I do look at the natives that are there to hopefully, reclaim the space. And then looking at the ground, the layout of the landscape, orientation to the sun, perhaps, that tells us what control methods we can use and how to frame it. I put the last two notes in because I knew that you all would say, let's look at this from a pollinator standpoint, and let's think about who's affected by the type of work that we do. So here at Wheeler Nature Park, I've never had to close. They've never had to close it down because I'm out there working. People stop and ask questions. So I'm kind of like an educational component on site, as well as getting the work done. Moving to the next slide, I'd like to pause for a second here and just invite all of you. I do this in presentations, I ask people to, in the chat, which I cannot see, type in a word or two that comes to mind when you think of stewardship. And I believe Bethany can look at those and pick out a couple of them. And I just wanted to invite you to do that. So I'm going to put mine up, my ideas. But before I do, I wanted to just talk about our biggest mistake as we approach rehabilitation work is in the realm of timeframes and expectations. And I'm a storyteller. Thanks for your patience. But this story is important to me, so I'm going to share it with you. Timeframes, what's realistic? I've already said 5 or 6 years. And that's not counting reintroduction of seeds and things blowing into your site. Basically, I'll tell you later that there's no such thing as a clean landscape. So we have to temper our expectations and say, what can we do here that brings things to a healthier condition, healthier for the pollinators, the insects, the plants, the people? What can we do as we move forward in time? So the story is the challenge of in Washington State, storing nuclear waste. The scientists were all gathered trying to figure out how they would mark a site or put signage up to alert people to the fact that there's a hazard on site and please don't mess with this site or dig or excavate for the next 10,000 years. You know, what sign would be appropriate there? And some tribal elders were on site and were on hand for the conversation. And I think the quote is, they were a little amused at the conversation about signage. And they suggested at one point during a break in the discussion, they said, you know, we could just tell them not to dig here, or we can tell them what toxins you've stored here on the land, because we're going to be here. We've always been here. We're not going anywhere. And that would probably simplify things for you. So that showed me, I think that's a profoundly sad story on the one hand, but I'm impressed with how that's such a radical, to us, radical way of viewing time. It's almost like there's no beginning and there's no end. It's a continuity thing. So here are my 3 words for stewardship. And Bethany, were you able to grab a few from the chat?
Yes, so we've got legacy, protection, caretaker, restoration, long memory, and communion, along with
Beautiful.
others.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent. I like those. There's no wrong answer. These are my 3. So I do tend to think in 3s. That's why you have the Trinity Stone. I believe stewardship is presence, because when you're there is when you learn things, and you need to be there and observing, open mind, open heart, open eyes, and see what's happening on the land, which way the water flows 365 days a year, if you really want to know and feel the dynamic underway. A young man in Ireland said, stewardship is continuity, Mike. And I had never heard that before. And I was, quite stunned. And I thought, wow, that's brilliant. Good for him. And he was absolutely correct. I asked a land manager across the river in New Hampshire. They had all the issues that we have in central Vermont, but they weren't getting anywhere with their invasives, and they were frustrated. So they called me in and I said, this is important for you all. I said, what kind of stewardship have you been doing? I can see that you've been out here, but I can't get it. I have no grasp of like where you started, which direction you're moving, I can't get a read on this place. Talk to me. So she said, yeah, she looked a little embarrassed. Mike, it's kind of been, our stewardship has been patchy and sporadic. I said, well, that explains, that pretty much tells me what I need to know. You all need to get a plan and stick with it and see it through and keep it going from year to year. So the continuity is huge. And the connection is what is that? Building connection to between people, from people to land, just through time, between generations. So those are the three words I throw out, I hold on to, and I do thank you for sharing your ideas. Excellent. I'll let you read this. And I come to the end and say that your landscape and life come with many choices, and I can only urge you to choose wisely. With these ideas on stewardship and choices, I come back to that idea of a clean landscape, and that there's no such thing as one. Okay, sure, but with trained people who are connected and who care and are safe and are committed to working as a good team, we can do it. EDRR stands for Early Detection Rapid Response. That's an acronym that the agencies use all the time. EDRR teams might try to catch infestations early on and keep them from getting out of control. That's always a better approach than LDNR, which I also see a lot of, and that stands for Late Detection, No Response. You may have seen some of that yourself. So what you have over here on the left is a volunteer, Linda, working on bittersweet. Both of these are bittersweet infestations. There's buckthorn in the background behind upslope of Linda. You can see our method with the buckthorn. We stump cut them and strip off sprouts in successive years. But both of these photos show that we've gotten the bittersweet out of the tree canopy. First of all, that's hazardous. Why let trees get broken up above so they can fall down on us? We get the bittersweet on the ground, down low. We have a lot of pulling and uprooting to do where that's reasonable to do. And we are basically stealing sunlight from the bittersweet, giving sunlight to the trees and shrubs that haven't had it forever. And even though these fruits on these vines on the right in the open area, they may still fruit, but those fruits are no longer available to the high canopy birds that spread them around. And I looked at the fruits. I did find some fruit in that open space last year. And those vines are under so much stress that it's maybe at 10% capacity. So yeah, we haven't not gotten ahead of seed production yet, but all this time, the natives have begun to recover and have stolen some sunlight from the non-native species. So a shout out to all these are all volunteers doing this good work in the South Burlington area. This photo shows you what that looks like when you have a honeysuckle shrub that's been cut back one time. You can call that beheaded or decrowned. The secret formula is 3 stress events in 2 growing seasons. So a growing season is basically April through October, roughly. If you stress a shrub, like I've done in that photo, 3 times in 2 growing seasons, that will kill off 75 to 90% of the population. If there's a shrub with its feet in the water, full sunlight, you're fertilizing it, singing to it, yeah, you might need to come back, for one more pass. But what you see in the photo on the right is what that shrub looked like. This is either treatment number 2 or 3. I cut it 6 months earlier. That's a season of resprout. No fruits were produced because this shrub did not have the energy to make fruit. So now that it's not fruiting, I'm able to finish it off at my own sweet time. And in conjunction with finishing off another 2 or 3 or 500 on the property. We've mentioned systems are dynamic a little bit. I can talk about that. I want to mention respond to the response, because that comes from pruning apple trees. I am trying to keep apple trees alive and healthy. So when I prune them, I might go after non-productive material the first year, but it's a 3-year process. So I I introduce myself to the tree, I make some initial cuts, I kind of get a read for what's happening. And then I come back in year 2 and 3, and I try to figure out what the tree is doing in response. So I do my treatment, I observe the response, and then I respond to the response. It's the same thing with honeysuckle and buckthorn, except that I'm trying to kill those. So what I'll do is go after where I think their strength is. If it's below ground, sometimes you encounter a really big tree. I know you have them, certainly buckthorn. I know you have impressive multiflora rows, but even though they're big in size, doesn't mean that I mean, shrubs do die of old age. And sometimes the really big ones, you just need to like scar them or put the Felco, there you go, put the Felco to one side of it and just cut through some living tissue. And that might be enough stress to put that individual over the edge. That's efficiency right there, knowing how much to respond to or how much stress to put to a certain shrub or tree. Let me point out the vines are the future. If you ask me what's the priority, I've written articles on it, but the priority in river corridors is certainly Japanese knotweed for the overwhelm that it does and the monoculture it creates. But when it comes to working safely on landscapes, I see wild parsnip as seriously problematic, and with ourselves being part of the problem because we somehow seem to spread it with us everywhere. And then I also see bittersweet and the vine family. They are getting stronger. They are getting more aggressive. Nobody's paying attention to them. And that goes hand in glove with the grasses and the herbaceous species. I have started writing in my reports. 2 years ago, I started telling everybody that I write reports for, we're ignoring mugwort, burdock, curly dock. Many of the comfreys are not native. Bull thistle, Canada thistle, you name it. We are ignoring the herbaceous plants because we're so like obsessive with, you know, the ones that are like at eye level, and just, I don't know, shrubs are more impressive. So pay attention to the vines and don't forget the grasses and the herbaceous. Here's just some slides of my methodology. These are all buckthorn. These are all common buckthorn. Again, I don't use chemicals because when you look on the right there, you see some gray dogwood coming up incredibly close to that buckthorn stump. I cut them or girdle them 2 or 3 feet high. And then I take the canopy and I make my brush piles in a logical place, like a divot or a little bit of a swale. Birds love that. Girdling is when if it's really crowded and I don't have room to make brush piles, then I'll do some girdling, and that gives me 2 or 3 years before that crown comes down and I don't have to worry about where do I put all this. So on the well, let me mention native species are right in there. Even if the buckthorn is dominating, had I used herbicide, which I do not, and I'm not even legally allowed to give advice, so I can't answer any questions in that realm. But I've seen herbicide go 10 feet out from a honeysuckle bush. And this is the landowner told me this. And they couldn't figure out why the maple tree at 10 feet and the dogwood bush at 6 feet, why were they both standing dead? And it took me a minute to go, well, you know, to realize how much brown was in the photo. And this was 2 years after the fact. So to basically use toxin when the natives are that close, I would submit you're going to have some collateral damage. And to me, that's a big deal. I don't know. To me, the natives are not, it's not for me to be damaging them in the process. What you see on the left is a buckthorn. My snips are in there down at the bottom. I think they're pointing at a low girdle. So girdle means circling around the trunk and cutting through. And then there's a higher girdle up above. So the sprouts and buckthorn can straddle, can go right past a girdle cut. That's why you have to come back for a second or third pass. It is a tough species.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
When you girdle, can you also just use a hatchet and go around the bottom of the tree and just take all the bark off at the bottom? Will that girdle
Absolutely.
just as easily? Okay.
Yeah, the easiest thing to use is really, I'm a fan of use the minimum amount of steel that you have to use. steel. You can use a linoleum knife. And the
Okay.
best time to girdle shrubs is this time of year right now, from now through June, because common buckthorn, not quite as easy, but glossy buckthorn, autumn olive, you do a cut around the circumference, you go down 3 inches, do another cut, you got to get, into the cambium, but then you do a vertical slit and you can just unfold that entire collar of bark. And as long as you've cut through the cambium, that's a pretty aggressive wound. But sure, and
Okay.
if I'm in a hurry okay, that's not really safe, but if I'm trying to move quickly with a purpose, I might just do just 1 or 2 quick jagged cuts with the Felco as I'm going by, just to put it under stress. But yes, a girdle is a couple inches wide. You can do 1 or 2 on a bush, and that will require follow-up, but that's a serious wound. You won't get growth above it unless a few years go by, and you won't get seed production.
So
there
you're
other-
cutting and then you're peeling the bark? Is that what you're doing? You're cutting and then you're doing a cut down and then peeling that bark around it off from the tree, or just leaving it?
Yes, because think of it as a paper towel holder, where
Mhm.
paper towels are, what are they, 12 inches, or even what toilet paper is 4 or 5 inches. You're basically trying to take off that cardboard wrapper at the bottom.
Okay.
And you don't have to do that, but if you're going to just kind of cut through the cambium, cutting like a saw width, which is only 1/8 of an inch, or you can do a jagged cut, but you're going to want to do more than one of those. Because I did a big girdle on a buckthorn in Wheeler Nature Park. It was a good 4 or 5 inches, and that tree, this was a 6-inch buckthorn, and it bridged the cut in 2 places, which is impressive. That's why, this is not a war on invasive species. I admire that. I admire tenacity. But obviously, I went back to work and trying to kill off that individual. So they can overcome a girdle, but it's a great method for not cluttering the landscape with all kinds of material. I was going to jump to knotweed if everyone's good with that,
Like the new
but
name?
I can certainly take a question as well. Not to put you on the spot, Bethany.
No, I think if
Okay.
people can post their questions in the
Okay.
chat, and
Okay.
we'll answer them when you're done, Mike.
Perfect. Okay, great. So, is there anybody that's not familiar with Japanese knotweed? Seeing no opposition, I'll proceed. This is typical. This is what you see, and the thing that stands out here is that there is no diversity along the riverbanks. Strictly Japanese knotweed. No trees can establish there. And river systems are dynamic, so there's water rising and falling and making it very difficult for shrubs, trees to even get started. And when you have erosion, high water events, knotweed breaks off, as you know all this. It floats downstream, parks in the next spot, and continues onward. So there's really 3. I want to emphasize there are 3 fairly new dispersal mechanisms for Japanese knotweed. Yes, we know about high water events, but last year, in the last 12 months, I've had 3 separate call outs for either a brand new septic installation or a couple years old, and all of a sudden the knotweed's coming out right right there in the leach field or in the underground tank. And that's a sweet area to grow if you're knotweed, because there's a lot of nutrient. So how's this happening? Well, you just saw the river channel, and you can speculate, there's certain sand that has to be, it's just engineered. There's a certain sand that gives the right filtering capacity for a septic system. And that sand is basically scooped up in lowlands, or basically along rivers, or in quarry areas that are frankly contaminated with Japanese knotweed, possibly other things like Phragmites or garlic mustard. So, I mean, big alarm bell went off for me in the last year or two, Septic installations, if you're getting one installed, or if you're not paying attention to yours, you should go have a look, because that's, I mean, it's just a matter of biosecurity, right? Clean the equipment before you show up and start tearing up, you know, somebody's ground and putting things into the ground. So we need to pay attention to biosecurity. Same applies for roads and driveways. It's not just installing them, but even moving snow in the middle of winter. If you go out in April when the ground is soft and you catch the corner of a knotweed patch with the plow and drag some rhizomes down the road 100 yards, you've just started a new Japanese knotweed patch. So these are the lessons learned here. I have a document I can share, Bethany, on advice I've given to towns for knotweed control. So when people call and ask me about it, I send them that document first. I can send you that, and then it can be a resource for the group, for the organization. I'm happy to do that. It probably answers a lot of questions and gives you a start point, and then you can follow up with me. In that document, I tell people the secret to Japanese knotweed is you can dig up, you can excavate if it's appropriate. I mean, if it's that's a decision to make on site. But basically, you're trying to deny photosynthesis. And the way you do that is by flush cutting to the ground, excavation where possible, just getting out some rhizomes or one of the big root nodes, and doing that 12 times a year in year one. So actually, we should be starting now. I was out over the weekend, and the knotweed is already an inch or two tall. So it's time to get started. And if you start a knotweed patch, you know, start small, start reasonable, but you're going to need to go out and manage that a dozen times this year. The final freeze is basically your first cut. So I used to work off of final freeze of winter is usually mid-May. That's not the case anymore. I think this year I wrote down my last freeze was March 27th, my last killing frost. And the same thing holds true in the fall. I cut knotweed right into October. And then I look at my phone, I look at the weather and say, is there a frost coming? And there hasn't been, sometimes into November. So I know that I have got to stay after, even though maybe I've already done my 12 cuts in year one, I might have to go out for a 13th cut, because the growing season is now a good 6 weeks longer. That's just reality. I didn't wish for that. It's not really helping, but that's the reality. When you start managing knotweed, you'll see that the plants respond, and you'll never have as much material as you had in year one. If you stick with it, you'll have a lot of material. But if you stick with it, you'll have less and less. It's just really that first year into the second year that can be kind of overwhelming. It's like people spend a lot of time and money taking things to the dump and running material, you know, bagging, and that's actually not time spent managing. So I say manage on site and get out there working with the first and last frost. I wanted to show you, we can come back to that slide, but I wanted to show you this. This is how you manage knotweed on site. These are weed drying stations. I do the same thing with wild parsnip. What these volunteers, what these ladies have done in Hyde Park is set up pallets, and all the cuttings get put on the pallets to dry in the sun and freeze in the winter. One full summer and one full winter will knock an 8-foot pile of knotweed cuttings down to maybe 2 feet tall. And then you can use the same system again. You can just keep piling on those pallets. Pallets are free. You're doing someone a favor when you offer to take the pallets away. The pallets do decompose. What these volunteers have done in Hyde Park is set aside a second pallet, the one in the center there with the green snow fence on it. That is their pallet strictly for rhizomal material. So on the left is canes and above ground cuttings, and on the right, the smaller pallets, those are rhizomes, which do have more potential for resprout or holding on to their viability a little bit longer. I submit that you can use the dried canes after a good hot summer, some time in the sun and some time at 20 below. You can use that on site as mulch. If you check it and proof it, I mean, there's nothing sweeter than using knotweed to smother itself. And if you don't have a good place to set up your pallets, set the pallets up right in the middle of the knotweed patch, and again, smother itself. Really, the idea with knotweed is that you're working from the outside toward the center. We know that the rhizomes can extend out 40, 50 feet from what you see above ground. So you really do need to manage the edges and work your way in so that it doesn't get behind you. You don't want to make the situation worse. The worst thing you can do with rhizomal propagators, knotweed, phragmites, goutweed, worst thing you can do is try to stomp on it and smother it on day one and deny the plants from coming up. This is like a group participation question. If the plant is already below and you won't let it come up, which way is it going to go? And that's what they do. They go sideways every possible direction. They sprout up with a vengeance. And that's when people drop the tools and run away, and they never come back in year 2. But that's just an indicator of how much stress you've got it under. So if we would just stick with it, the knotweed is really revealing its full size. And that's when you've got it under stress and you got to stick with it. I should probably, let me continue on. I'll certainly take questions. I'm moving on to wild parsnip because I'm told, I believe that's an issue in Addison County. Is that correct? It's an issue here, central Vermont. It's an issue around Burlington. I'm giving you a visual of a Christmas tree farm because I want to get that picture in your head. Okay, this is the Christmas tree farm in near Windsor. There are Christmas trees in that photo, and that's my truck in the background. How do you work this space if your job is to prune the Christmas trees and shape them so they look good in our living rooms? I mean, this is a financial loss for somebody, and this difference maker, this landowner with 9 acres of Christmas trees, has hired me since 2011. And I'm going to show you the map. She doesn't use chemicals. She doesn't even want to get that possibly on the Christmas trees. But it's a financial consideration for her. So this is the property. And when I first took a look there, I said, okay, what's going on? North is to the top. The road is to the bottom, Route 44. I looked at, so which way is the mower moving on the road? It's moving from lower right to upper left. If the mower is going to drag seeds onto the property, they're going to come from the lower right, correct? Yes. Mowing decks and contractors are, we got to get people washing and cleaning their equipment a little more often because that's pretty much a nightmare for managing weed seeds. But that's the direction of the mowing deck. The wind blows from the left, from the west. Sun is coming in from the south. And there's deer all over this property. So I've basically cleared, you can see my pointer. I've cleared almost everything to the left of the building, everything above, north of the building, and these 2 nice patches in front. And I'm really down to the right, the bottom right, and the far right. I'm not close to done yet, but we've made great progress. The problem is biosecurity. I mentioned that, right? So what else goes on this property? Sun, wind, animals, birds. Think. Something else is happening here. The Christmas trees. So they come in November after the seeds. If I didn't get the parsnip on the right side of the photo, and they go driving around through there, grabbing Christmas trees, load them up. I've asked the fine company to, please, you think you all could harvest trees in the clean area first and then move to the area where there's still parsnip? And I'm not there, so I can't really say what they do, but I keep finding parsnip over there to the left, and I'm a little curious. And it's always an interesting conversation. So the point here is, I'm present, I'm there, I see all these dynamics, I try to control them, And it just really makes me have to step up my game and claim the space and tell the parsnip in polite terms, you should leave because I'm not leaving and you're not welcome here. And then I have to go at it. So that's parsnip. This is just a quick photo of Wheeler Nature Park in Burlington, where you can see the three, I talk about waves and bell curves. What that means is I manage plant species in waves of coming out, waves of presence. So I don't come out just once. I get the timing right. I've figured out the timing, when I need to be there. I mean, I manage 20 some parsnip sites, and I need to know. I wake up every day and go, okay, where do I need to go today? You look at this photo on the right and you see there are yellow, this is wild parsnip. There's some yellow flowers there on the left. There's some that are in the center that are a little bit greener and yellowing off. And then the ones to the far right are browned off. And those are the ones that are viable and a threat of actually creating more parsnip. So the approach here, when you have thousands of plants, is I know I can walk past this yellow one because it's going to be another 2 weeks before there's a chance of making seeds. What I absolutely have to do on this day is get the brown ones, or the ones that are going hard green, deep green, because they are really close to achieving viability. That's true of, think about buckthorn. Common buckthorn hardens the seed in September. Glossy buckthorn is able to harden off its seed in July, August. So which is the greater urgency? I walk past common buckthorn all the time because I've got to stay ahead of glossy buckthorn, and I can come back in August, September and finish up the common buckthorn. So that's a distinction. Now, I'm trying to show you the bell curve means some plants, if there's 1,000 plants, 1 or 2 of them is going to flower early. 900, some of them are going to flower, June 30th. And there's always going to be a parsnip. I've seen them flowering in October. There's always 1 or 2 flowering late, trying to get past me, thinking, oh, Mike's not coming back. But nope. And that's the problem with mowing, is we mow once or twice and we say, okay, it's August, it's dry, we're good. Not the case. Parsnip is outsmarting us, and it's even learning in this case. Maybe I shouldn't say learning, but instead of being 5, 6, 7 feet tall, after a couple years of control, it figures out if we just kind of stay underneath the goldenrod and the other yellow flowers, maybe Mike won't see us. So again, I have to step up my game. But that's showing, I mean, would I have learned that? Probably not. On the left, you see that you see those roots are all resprouts of broken fragments of wild parsnip. And actually, this one is a double. So there's 2 sprouts coming off that broken root. I probably need to keep moving. This is a weed drying station. This is the Christmas tree farm. This is what thousands of parsnip look like when you pile them up on a wooden pallet. You get airflow underneath the plants. They dry out, they die. There's no brown. All these seed heads are green or yellow, and this pile is safe. I don't think I've ever seen plants, by accident, a new germination from this pile. If I get there late and I'm pulling late in the season, I might start a pile just for hot plants that actually could potentially germinate. So I keep my piles separate depending on viability considerations. In the foreground, you see the potato fork. So there it is, flat tines, the most brilliant tool for managing parsnip and wild chervil. It allows you to open up the earth, extract the root, close up the earth, and it's almost like you were never there. Let's continue past this slide. I've mentioned biosecurity and safety. When I say integrating across disciplines, that means knowing what everyone else is doing on the site. If you've got people creating bird habitat or people doing brush hogging and they're not communicating with you, it's almost like we're working against one another. You need to synchronize. I'm in pretty good communication with some folks on some properties and not so much on others, and it's a challenge. When I say think like they do, what does that mean? Think like birds, think like deer. Where do deer are lazy? Where do they want to go? What path are they going to take? I mean, if you can't pick out the deer tracks, just try to think like a deer, and They're lazy. Which way are they going to go? Birds are always going to roost in certain trees and then drop the seed. You know, the fruit stays inside the bird for what, 20 minutes? All those seeds drop in a ring around the tree. So that's where you look if you're scouting for populations. This is an aerial view of Wheeler Nature Park in South Burlington. The main takeaway here is that west is to the left, and the wild parsnip was where my cursor is, all the way to the left. Had the wind blown through those original 209 plants where my cursor is, this entire space, 80 some acres, 40, 50 open space would be all wild parsnip. It is challenged by burdock and comfrey and mugwort. So the herbaceous species are making, spotted knapweed, are making a serious run here. The other consideration is down at the bottom, there's a Phragmites plant down by that pink dot. Phragmites population at the upstream end of a wetland. If you follow my cursor through the wetland, this is the direction of flow. It's really not a good thing to have Phragmites at the head of that, because all of this is downstream of a few Phragmites plants. So I end up at the top corner up there. Obviously, Phragmites is a desperately important consideration on this site. I think aerial mapping is a really good thing. Bethany, time check. I can wrap up pretty soon.
Yeah, about another few minutes. Yeah,
Okay,
5
happy to-
minutes or
happy to do that. Okay. When I talk about measuring and benchmarking, benchmarking means take the same photo from the same location over and over, year after year, or 2 or 3 times a year. And that's how you capture transition. That's how you make people feel like, oh, wow, something really is going on here, and I'm making a difference. I do that at King Arthur Baking Company. There's no parsnip on their property anymore. The glossy buckthorn is in full-scale retreat, and we're doing really good things. And they just so you know, King Arthur Baking Company wants to really move forward with pollinator work. So I call them a difference maker. So just know, start looking around for business partners in the community. I've always enjoyed Guy's Farm and Yard. Bread and Butter Farm is north of you, King Arthur Baking Company. Support local and support fellow difference makers. But taking photos is essential to documenting progress. When I talk about counting, I count all day long. I learned that I can pull or cut and pile roughly 380 to 400 buckthorn, honeysuckle, autumn olive, thorny, nasty, multiflora rose. I can handle about 400 of them on my first time on a property. If I really do good work and come back in year 2, 3, 4, my pace more than doubles. So I can walk the stone wall. I mean, you can do this. You can walk your property with your beverage and your hand snips and just kind of cruise on through and go around the elderberry and the dogwood and go, oh, look, a honeysuckle, walk over, snip, 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 keep on marching on. So I can do approaching 900 shrubs, 800 to 900 on a property that I'm familiar with. I've been there and I've set the stage for my return. So again, I get more cost effective over time. And the agencies don't even actually ask me to manage bittersweet. I just kind of throw that in as there's no value in my mind in managing all the buckthorn or all the garlic mustard, but letting the bittersweet just destroy the canopy. I cannot I cannot just walk by and give a free pass to bittersweet. And the other thing on this slide that's important is break fruit and seed production. I believe the verbs on the left here belong to your group. This is something this is advice that you give and counsel to people. See what you've got, assess it, target, prioritize areas and species you want to go after, do the removal, and then plant or promote natives. I agree with all those. I put my words on the right to say that a lot of that is continuous and the methods are site specific, and you can plant in the spring and in the fall. And I actually encourage fall planting. right into roughly Thanksgiving timeframe. The idea is keep the plants, minimize the amount of time the plant is out of the ground. Pull it, move it, get it back in the ground, and that's a good thing. This is probably a slide you want to see. This is fall, winter, spring, summer. You do your planning in winter. When I say make the site safe the site, that's winter is when we go out and cut out all the steel and get all the posts and all the trip hazards and all the bittersweet, all the dead vines, all the live vines. We make it safe to work so that after we celebrate the International Day of the Worker on May 1st, we're able to get out there the very next day and not be held up dealing with fence posts when we really should be dealing with wild chervil or garlic mustard or bittersweet. 4th of July is a critical date to show you that any action you take before the 4th of July, like girdling, cutting, stump cutting, any stress you put on a shrub before the 4th of July is pretty much certainly going to guarantee no seed production for that year. You don't have to pull it out of the ground. I have a weed wrench, but if I can stress 1,000 plants and break seed production, that's more cost effective in the long run than trying to uproot 100 plants if I don't necessarily need to do that. So 4th of July is an important number. The further south you go, the earlier that date gets. We can talk about this in the question and answer. I thought it was important to consider the questions here. What actually is habitat? When we talk about site rehabilitation, we tend to get locked into specifics or certain visuals, but I'm inviting us to think more deeply about it. And the reason intergenerational connection is important is not because these caterpillars will turn into butterflies, but because we do need to communicate with our young people and share the wisdom, old to young and between generations, in order to make sure that we have continuity, carrying on the work. I did mention refreshing mindsets and methods and measurables. In grant world, you use the term deliverables, how many and how much money and how many people and so forth. This is the VYCC at Wheeler Nature Park again. Behind them is the oak tree. So I want to just say that we looked around this space. There was no driving ecological reason to manage around this oak tree, other than that we like wood elves. But I looked at the site with the crew, and there is a wetland behind them there. But we looked around and we said, you know, this tree is kind of magical. And it's not just one tree. There's a grove of oak trees here. The offspring of this is called the honey oak. And there are wild bees up in the limbs. There's a grove of oak trees coming into place here, young saplings and many generations from that tree. That's powerful. That's the significance of an oak grove goes way back through time. And there are also cedars, both red and white. So a cedar grove is also a really cool place. So you have this interesting circular feature. And again, I said, this oak tree draws people. The VYCC did all the stump cutting and the removal here, and you can see some stumps there, and they did it safely. They worked over at Red Rocks for 2 weeks in poison ivy. They minded their protocols and washed their tools and followed directions and had no poison ivy incidents in the 2 weeks that they worked there with poison ivy up over their knees. I think that's a good place to close, Bethany. So I will say thanks to all of you and leave you with these thoughts and my contact information and a lovely photo that you'll never see. That's a giant hogweed on the left, and you don't usually get to see the crown, the umbel, the flower head from straight on like that. So that's a pretty unique photograph. Thank you all for your interest and your attention. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mike. So Jill and Jenny will do the questions from the chat.
Yep, so we actually have quite a few questions about wild parsnip.
Sure.
And it's about whether they should be cutting or digging, and what are the safety precautions. And then there's the question, which I think is a good one here. If parsnip did I say parsnip? If parsnip has a bank of seeds in the soil that will be activated by disturbing the soil, is digging worse than timed mowing, cutting, or are we supposed to be digging it up?
Got it. Okay, thank you. Parsnip is complicated. And we will never get ahead of parsnip as long as, you name it, deer, ATVs, woodchucks, bicycles, landscaping crews, the wind. I counted once, 12,000 seeds per plant. And basically, I hesitate to train people on wild parsnip because I know that it takes incredible discipline not to touch your face when you've been handling parsnip for an hour. But if a mosquito lands on your face and I've had people tell me, Mike, I rubbed my eyes, that's it, you're done for the day, and you better get water in your eyes quickly and wash it out. It is a water-based sap. You don't need soap. I mean, it wouldn't hurt to use soap, but it's a water-based sap. That is the hazard. I used to wear a lot of clothing, like 3 layers. Now that I'm a shade older, I don't wear as many layers because for me, safety considerations, dehydration is the biggest issue for me, and coming down with a heat-related injury, back in the bushes where nobody's ever going to see me. So wild parsnip, the number one consideration is it's best done as a community effort. And there are people doing that. I believe there's a group in Moncton. There's a group in Randolph. I work 20 some properties. North Pomfret's a great example where we use the terrain to our advantage. So think about this for a second. There is several miles of roadside, I was there today, where I basically work the height of land down into a bowl, and there's no parsnip or chervil allowed inside the bowl. The bowl is land where people live, and it's several miles across. But outside the bowl, picture your ice cream bowl. Outside the rim of the bowl, gravity carries all the parsnip seed away from the area I'm trying to control. So I still have roads and vehicles, and I can't really control that. And as soon as I get a handle on an area, they do a culvert replacement, and then I got to check that. So the lesson is landscapes are dynamic, and nothing beats me or you or someone walking those roads 2 or 3 times a year with the potato fork in hand. Yes, it draws attention, and most people know who I am now, but every now and then people are, who's that guy? But you absolutely have got to walk the space and find the 1 or 2 that got away last year and the 5 or 10 or 5,000 that got started this year. They are biennials, so you have a chance, and a good time-saving trick is to just pull the ones with the flowers, because there's going to be a lot of year 1 plants, but they're not going to flower. You do need to come back in September and make sure like a cute little one didn't flower to try to, get by. But they are biennials, and you do have time on your side with the year 1 plants. Parsnip is complicated, and as far as the soil disturbance question, parsnip is related to chervil, is related to giant hogweed, and is related to cow parsnip. All of these seeds ride high in the soil, meaning they are at the surface or just below. So I did have a guy rototill lightly on a giant hogweed site. There were no tall plants. It was just the earth. And I was impressed. I think we kind of drove germination there. We got all these plants to germinate before they should have. And that site was clean after like 3 years. Giant hogweed has a 10-year seed life. So to get 10 years of work done in 2 or 3 years is brilliant. I really don't support soil disturbance. The better approach is solarizing. And that is either using clear plastic to use heat, driving heat into the soil. It's a big air bubble on the ground. You have to secure the perimeter, but I can share, I'm going to get a sip of water. I can share a photo, Bethany. It's basically, you go buy a 20 by 50 clear plastic, number 4, number 6 poly. It's a very nuanced approach. I have done a couple dozen solarizing installations. You hire somebody like myself to do it the first time. You have 20 people watch and talk about it and learn, and then you go try it in other places, and you kind of use the guidance, but also pick up on things like, if there's water flowing below the surface, solarizing is not going to work because water carries away heat. But solarizing will push heat 10 inches into the ground and kill every seed that's in there and every plant that's in the ground, including natives. But in 30 to 40 days of hot plastic, you can sterilize that site, throw down some clean compost, and the fungi and the microbes, the bacteria, will come back fairly quickly, and you'll accomplish 5 years of work in 40, 45 days. I mean, that's brilliant. You could hire me for 5 years, but most people like the idea of, let's try the 45 days, Mike. And I've seen it work more often than not. I've seen it work partially, and I've seen 1 or 2 times it's like, no, this isn't. I mean, sometimes deer, sometimes cows will run across the plastic and puncture it, and that doesn't help. But solarizing is a powerful tool. Smothering is the other option, where you use heavy plastic for, again, you got to figure out the duration, 10 days, 30 days. With biennials and perennials, you have to keep the plastic on the ground for more than just overnight. Annuals, if you're trying to do a burn down, that can be 24 hours or so, but to get perennials, you got to keep the plastic down for some amount of time.
Any suggestions for purple loosestrife?
Yes, thank you. I don't manage purple loosestrife because the beetles are available, the Garicella beetles. Nobody that I know of in Vermont or New Hampshire is tracking the success of the beetles as a biocontrol. I know you can purchase the Garicella beetles online, and there's no restrictions. You can put them out there. The beetles are supposed to keep the plants under stress. I do at King Arthur. There's purple loosestrife up and down Route 5. I'm never gonna beat purple loosestrife or eradicate it, because the seed is just granular. It's like powder. But I stay out of it after Labor Day, and I uproot it or cut it flush if I can, leading up to Labor Day. I really don't want it at King Arthur, and it hasn't taken over. I've been able to. We're kind of at an uneasy standoff. I've kept it out of some really nice drainage sumps, though, just by cutting and up. It's hard to uproot when it's in wet ground. It's really, don't strain your back. Difficult. But I believe there's just other plants that should be the priority.
Mike, there's a question about extracting plants like barberry in particular that's very close to mature trees. This person says digging it out just is not helping. It keeps coming back.
Sure.
Should I just keep cutting it back? Any suggestions?
Yes, with multiflora rose, burning bush, and barberry, frequently people just don't cut it often enough. You don't have to cut 8 or 10 times for a shrub in a growing season, but somebody asked me, Mike, I cut my multiflora rose bush back every year, and it comes back every year. I mean, so using that 3 cuts in 2 growing seasons, I said, how about maybe this year, cut it twice? And, cut it early, cut it late, and maybe you have to do that again the next year, cut it twice instead of once. Burning bush and barberry have really cute little seedlings, and they propagate by the hundreds. So they're possibly seeing some offspring of the main plant, and they also sucker, and they spread like raspberries. But the deal there is just get some really good loppers. Felco doesn't sponsor me, but they should. So Felco, they make great loppers. When you have good loppers, you can cut till the cows come home and you'll be singing and dancing, and it's game changing. When you have junk tools, it makes everything challenging. So multi-4 rows, barber, anything with thorns, you know, maybe there's herbicide resistance, maybe there's resistance to various things, but I have yet to discover a bush with Felco resistance. And that's a good thing.
There's a question about why do you cut 2 to 3 inches up instead of at the ground?
On
2 to 3 feet.
Buckthorn? Oh, 2 to 3 feet,
2 to
sorry.
3 feet. Okay, so cutting is important. The buckthorn gets cut at belt height because my tools are expensive and I don't use a chainsaw anymore, but on the occasions when I would use a chainsaw, I was talking with another guy and we both agreed. I mean, if you're the one who cleans it and sharpens it, you're a little protective of it. And I'm not going to go sticking the tip of the saw or my Felco tools into the dirt where the stones live. And I'm not going to beat up my tools. What you do have to watch for, though, is barbed wire in the trees or those staples. So you try to find if there's any sign of wire coming out of the tree, you might cut just right above that. So I cut them at that height. Then when I come back through, I don't have to bend over because everything's right there. I can either strip off the 30 or 40 resprouts just with my gloves or maybe with hand snips, or I can just cut the whole stump like 2 or 3 inches or 6 inches lower and the whole process starts over again. You can kind of march it to the ground. The other thing on cutting, Japanese knotweed, changing focus here. When you cut Japanese knotweed, you have to cut the canes absolutely flush to the ground. No being lazy and getting it an inch or so high, because once cut, those canes, you know, inch diameter, 1.5 inch diameter or smaller, they will harden off. If you were lazy and cut them at an angle, you have now created a riverbank full of sharpened, hardened stakes. And those will go, you know, someone barefoot or with, that's not cool. So knotweed, absolutely flush cut it.
Mike,
I think that's enough that's good on cutting.
Is there, are there resources that you can recommend, for example, websites, people who can help work? I know that you are available to work, but are there other people or a list somewhere of people if you're too busy? Just more resources for people who are looking to find out about invasives. Yeah,
no, good question. Thank you. We are really challenged to find people to do land management. I don't know about the chemical approach, but in the non-chemical, the manual and the mechanical, I know a few people that use machinery. I have managed to train one fella in the Burlington area and another younger guy here in Royalton. I am meeting a younger lady in Burlington this weekend. She is all about goats. And she wants to see Wheeler and she wants to see Red Rocks. And I've told her she should branch out a little bit and do garlic mustard and a few other things as well, maybe Japanese knotweed. But we really need more people to offer goats as an option. They're not as easy as they sound, but we do need more people doing that. I'm trying to bring somebody along in Bennington County, but yeah, we don't have the whole state covered very well for giving people manual control work. But I will say this, I am happy to train. If there's somebody, I don't care. I honestly don't care what age they are, because you can do this at any age. If there's 1, 2, 3 people that want to learn how to manage the shrubs, how to manage the vines, how to manage knotweed, they can come out with me and work alongside for a day and just sponge up information off me, and I'll help them start their own company. I've given away, I'm trying to help other people get started with businesses, because yes, I'm full up. What I kind of enjoy myself doing these days is helping people stay safe. So presentations and just discussions on working safely. And I can do consultations and some planning work. The most effective way to do that is to go to Windham County or Addison County or Franklin County and spend the day and visit, 2, 3, 4, 5 people all in one day and have good conversations, or kind of organize it. Maybe a group, like you all could organize multiple assessments or site visits in one day. But we're really short on labor. I have to say that. We do need more people to train other people. I'm happy to do it, but there, enough said.
Well, Mike, there's people really appreciate what you've had to offer.
Oh, good.
I think given the time that Bethany's probably ready to do the closing. But thank you so much from all of us.
Thank you all. Thank you. Okay, great. Send questions. You're welcome to do that.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Mike. This has been great. We've had a lot of interest, and questions will continue coming, and we'll send them on. And the next months, we will be planting and watching for pollinators, and you can email us at, maybe Jill, could you post the email again in the chat? pollinatorpathway.addisoncounty@gmail.com. And this session has been recorded, and the recording will be available on our website within probably a week and a half. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Mike. You've brought us so much.
Thanks so much.